So in Learning Target 5.5, we are looking at different kinds of graphical ways to represent data. The first one is just a dot plot, and each one of these dots represents a piece of data. So if I look at these dots, it means if I listed out the data in order, I would have a 56, I would have two 60s, so I'd have a 60 and another 60, I'd have a 68, two 76s, so a 76 and another 76, and then lastly I'd have a 96. So if I wanted to graph something like this, and I was given this data in the first place, I would need to make sure that when I made my number line, I had a consistent scale. I'm going to need to go by ones most of the time. I could have gone by twos here because all of this data is even, so if I went by twos, I would still have those marks on my graph to be able to use. But I can't go from 56 to 60 and then from 60 to 68. My scale needs to be consistent all the way across my graph. Notice that this has a title down here at the bottom, and what the units are, the BPM means beats per minute. And again, this interval is the same. In this case, they're going by ones all the way across. You don't see dot plots often, but you do see them sometimes. Now the second kind of graph that we're going to look at is a histogram. So if I were to take this data and I wanted to graph it in a histogram, it looks in some ways like a bar graph, but we'll talk about the difference between those in just a minute. Each one of these bars represents the number of pieces of data here that falls in this interval. Now, sometimes they don't actually look like this. Sometimes instead of being 0 and 5 here, it'll be something like, let me draw this up here on the right, that bar would have a 0 to 4 down here. So you'll see it both ways, and then that bar would be still 1 unit high. Now the reason I know it's 0 to 4 instead of 0 to 5, each one of these bars has to have the same width for its interval. So if this one starts at 0, the next one has to start at 5, and the next one starts at 10. So you'll notice when you get over to 20 to 25, well, it says there are two values in there. That's because 21 and 24 are the two values that fall between the 20 to 25 range. So 20 to 24. And then this 25 goes in the next interval because this interval starts at 25 and ends at 29. This one starts at 30 and ends at 34. So be very careful as you're doing these because it's tempting to put that 25, or if you had a 20 or a 35 or a 40, put those in the wrong interval. So again, if this first one starts at 0, the next one has to start at 5, and the next one starts at 10. So the height of the bars tells me, for example, right here in the middle, that from 35 to 39, there are 6 data values that fall in that range. And if I count up 35 to 39, I've got the 35, 36, 36, 37, 38, and 39. Yep, I have 6 different values that fall in that range. Notice again the title on the graph, and then my axes are labeled. On the left, this says count. Often it says frequency. So it says the data is shown by marking the count or frequency in each interval. And then down here is the thing that we're measuring. So if we were measuring people or dollars or something else, that would be down here. In this case, we're measuring the quality ratings of regular potato chips. Now, the difference between a histogram and a bar graph shows categories. So what's down here on the bottom, in this case, is birth month. Maybe sometimes it's color or favorite car or something else. It's not numbers. It's not quantifiable things like numbers. Now, the one that we're going to be dealing with quite a bit is a box plot. The box plot is directly related to the 5-number summaries that you just found yesterday because it says find the 5-number summary first. Mark the median, the first quartile, and the third quartile with line segments. Well, they kind of marked them with dots. They didn't. So the median is here, the first quartile is here, and the third quartile is here. So I put these little line segments on my paper and draw the box. Now I use a straight edge typically. I'm not using one on here, but you draw this box. Then it says I want to draw whiskers to connect the box. So this dot out here is my minimum, and then I draw a whisker to the box from my minimum. This dot out here is my maximum, and I draw this long whisker out to my maximum. It is not a requirement that you use a straight edge. However, if you can't draw very straight, you need to use a straight edge. These need to be relatively straight. Down below here, though, needs to be my number line, and often there's a title on here. Not every time, but often there is if I know what these numbers stand for. Again, my scale is consistent. In this case, I'm going by hundreds all the way up my graph. Now, the reason that these are called quartiles, my first quartile, third quartile, and I said in my previous video that the median is actually the second quartile, is that it divides the data into quarters, roughly, into fourths. That means 25% of my data falls from the minimum to the first quartile. Another 25% falls between the first quartile and the median. Another 25% falls between the median and the third quartile. And then the last roughly 25% of my data falls from the third quartile up to the maximum. Again, it's rough, as you saw if you looked at your data, but it's fairly accurate, which means when they're asking me where most of the data falls, if they want to know what percentage of the data, what percentage of the values are above 400 points scored, well, here's 400 points scored, that's the median. So I've got this part of the box and this whole whisker, 50% of my data, 50% of my points scored are between 400 and the 2400 that's listed there as the maximum. The interquartile range, remember, the IQR or interquartile range is the range from basically the width of the box. So my third quartile, which looks like it's about 800, minus my second quartile, which looks like it's about 300. So 800 minus 300 roughly, and that's kind of hard to read, sorry. My interquartile range is 500. Whereas the range of the data, in this case, is about 2400 minus the minimum, which looks like it's about 150. So the range is 2,250. But the interquartile range is only the width of the box itself, and that's about 500. Now what I'd like for you to do before you come to class is to look at those problems on the bottom of your page with the two box plots and see if you can answer those questions. Thank you.